Greetings and welcome to today's CFO Leadership Council program, A to Z of BCP, defining and validating business continuity planning in the next normal. Given the challenges you are all facing currently and maybe lack of sleep, we are especially honored that you have chosen to connect with us today. And of course, a special thanks to Tipalti, today's exclusive webcast sponsor. Our guest speaker today is Chris Doxey, President of Doxey Inc. My name is Kristen Todd. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for the CFOLC, and I'll be facilitating today's session. Joining me today from the CFOLC team and working her magic behind the scenes is Caroline Boyce, National Membership Manager. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. Your lines are muted so that there are no distractions. However, we encourage your questions throughout today's program. Type them in the question area in your dashboard, and I'll ask on your behalf at the end of the program during the Q&A session. Today's program qualifies for 1 CPE credit. To qualify, you must be a current CFOLC member and answer all of the polling questions in today's program. In order to answer those, you must be logged in. So if you dialed in and need CPEs, please hang up and use that direct link provided to you at registration. Also, at the end of today's program, you'll receive a quick 30-second survey. We hope you'll complete it, and because we do love your feedback. Be sure to connect with us online, visit us via website, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. It'll get you the latest CFOLC and industry news. We have several programs coming up to the closeout our 2020 season. Registration is open, and we hope you keep looking at that full calendar of online events. If you're not a current CFOLC member and are interested, we have several levels of membership, premium access and standard access. Both include CFO Connect, our online members only forum, and recordings of all of our programs are available in the program library. Also, next week marks our 10th annual conference, CFO Masterclass, November 11th through 13th. For the first time ever, it's virtual, and with the lineup we've got in the agenda, it promises to be our best yet. Leaders from Peloton, ServiceNow, 23andMe, Twitter, and more, with plenty of opportunity to learn and connect. Premium access members attend free. Other members can attend at 50% discount. Registration is still open, and if you're interested, connect with either me or Caroline after today's program. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Chris Doxey, President of Doxey Inc. She has been the owner and president of Doxey Inc. since 2012. She provides management consulting services to clients such as NACHA, Oracle, and MasterCard. She advises her clients on how to implement leading-edge best practices and automation in the areas of internal controls, risk management, and metrics for financial operations. She specializes in the procure-to-pay, order to cash, and record to report processes. Thank you for being here with us today, Chris. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and welcome to our discussion today. And it's a topic that I'm sure is very much near and dear to your heart on business continuity planning. And I'm pleased to be working with Tipalti as a sponsor of this event. And what we'll do is we'll jump right into the agenda. And there's a lot of material here, and we also have a little panel discussion at the end. So we're going to go pretty quickly to make sure we cover everything for you, and of course, handle your questions at the end as well as the polling questions. So our agenda looks at a little introduction to our topic. We have identified 4 pillars of business continuity. And we're going to take a look at how to establish an environment for business continuity and how to build business continuity plans and tests into your process, and then how to validate your business continuity plan. Okay, where we are now, and unfortunately we don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, is with COVID and the pandemic, we're in a black swan event. And a black swan event is actually very rare, unpredicted, of course, and unprecedented. And we're hearing all these terms, I know, for the last several months. And the event is changing our global economy, society, and history. And, you know, maybe a light at the end of the tunnel could be that even though the event is creating significant chaos, it can also be a leading factor for drivers of change for the longer term. And what we look at is with the change in our environment, we can have things like fraud occur. And there are three types of fraud, and we'll be getting into this a little bit more at the end of our presentation. But what we're trying to prevent and what we're concerned about, of course, are internal and occupational fraud. That includes bribery, corruption, asset misappropriation, and financial statement fraud. External fraud is comprised of bid rigging schemes, phony suppliers and customers, security breaches, phony invoices, both on the AP side and AR side, and as well as phony payments. And what we're facing too is fraudsters are taking advantage of the situation, so there's a tremendous amount of fraud against individuals. That includes identity theft, Ponzi schemes, investment scams, and phishing schemes. And one of the things that is a very well-known case study is even before COVID, there was a business email compromise scheme with Facebook and Google, and someone posed as a phony supplier in Eastern Europe and was able to walk away with about $200 million. So very, very interesting, and that's why we're talking about business continuity and some of the factors that you can consider to actually build your business continuity plan. Okay, and this graphic, and I'll pull up the rest of it. If we look at business continuity planning, it starts with getting your hands around the crisis, and that's crisis management and communication. And with the change in our business environment, very important to make sure that communication is still happening. And the second component or pillar of business continuity is business resumption plans. How do we rebuild our business? How do we resume to something like the new normal or the next normal, whatever you'd like to call it? The third component is cybersecurity and IT recovery. And this isn't as daunting as it used to be several years ago because our systems are in the cloud. However, we do need to pay very much close attention to cybersecurity, as mentioned in the short case study I just talked about. And the fourth pillar is a response to the pandemic. What's our change in business model? How do we make sure our employees are protected? And with some of the examples we'll talk about throughout the presentation, you'll see how that can happen. So what are the enablers? The enablers are automating manual processes, implementing risk management tools, reducing the use of spreadsheets, and getting into the mode of business continuity planning and management. So it's not just having the plan, it's actually managing the plan and making sure it's updated and fitting in with your business needs. The results are operational resilience and agility, managed risk, accurate data, and timely and precise financial statements. And one thing to consider throughout business continuity planning is the people, the process, and the technology. And again, we'll discuss those components in a lot more detail. So why do we focus on business continuity? And as mentioned earlier in my introduction, COVID has created a new wave in ransomware attacks and taking advantage of firms at their most vulnerable time and using the pandemic in some cases as a hook for victims. And manual transaction processes are putting employees and companies at risk. I was on the call early in the pandemic with a client, and they were very concerned because they had to go in the office and pay invoices because of a manual invoice processing area and accounts payable. The last thing I'll mention here is that internal controls programs that are manual don't support ongoing risk management and the continuous monitoring process. So any manual process is not able to identify those risks in real time, and those are impacting businesses as well. It's a good lead-in for the next slide here, emerging risks and 2021. And yes, we're already looking at 2021 and how things are going to be a little bit different. We mentioned fraud, we mentioned cybersecurity, but it's also cyber resilience. Data insecurity, the accurate and timely financial close process, anti-money laundering and other compliance violations. This is what happened in that one case study I mentioned. Market integrity, people and behavior, and competition. This comes from KPMG, but I pulled in a few more bits of information I gathered from my experience. And one thing we can think about from a business continuity perspective, we're changing processes and we're also building in resilience. And we have our first polling question. And the question is, what is the status of your business continuity plan? And the choices are, we don't have a plan. Our plan is currently being updated. We test our BCP regularly. And the fourth choice is we use a third party for our business continuity process. Okay, we have the results of that poll. Okay, we'll move on and go back to the results.
Yeah, so Chris, it seems like we have a different question in there. Let me see if I can fix those going forward. You just want to continue
Okay.
on if we can fix these in the
Okay.
back. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's all right. No, I was getting nervous. I wasn't getting a response back, so that's great. Thank you. Okay, we're going to get into establishing an environment for business continuity. And I sort of equate continuity with controls and best practices. And even without having this black swan event that we're talking about, what we should be thinking about is how can we get into that continuous monitoring and almost that resilience sort of environment. I'm going to give you some definitions. Risk management identifies potential risks and analyzes the impact of that risk and takes precautionary steps to reduce the risk. Business continuity is how to continue working through a disruption with all aspects of the company, determining minimum requirements to continue operations and outlining the steps to proceed against any disaster. Disaster recovery is all about resolving the disruption and is more of a focus on the technical side of the process and identifies critical systems required, data loss allowances that the company can afford to lose. And all three of these methods work alongside and they complement each other and focus on disaster prevention, preparation, and recovery. And this is the optimal solution against overall disruptions. Again, we don't have crystal balls. We certainly don't know what's coming down the road, but having an idea on how to keep our companies going is really a key point. So how do we develop this business continuity plan? Well, it starts with a business impact analysis. And usually a workshop is included with that. And it's to determine what is required from a business operation perspective and having the business process owners involved in this. Could include filling out questionnaires and follow up to make sure the information that you've gathered is valid. Now, without saying, what we need to do is make sure we have a team or individual project manager in charge of the business continuity plan. Next is recovery strategies, and that's documenting the resource requirements based on the business impact analysis, looking at the gap analysis, and then looking at potential recovery strategies. And of course, with management and business process owner approval, and then implement strategies. The development is setting the framework, organizing recovery teams, developing any relocation plans if necessary. Of course, that meant we're all working from home pretty much now. And with business continuity and IT procedures, you would go ahead and write a plan make sure that plan is documented, and document any manual workarounds, and then you assemble the plan and validate management approval. Last, and this is a part that is very difficult to do, and a lot of companies don't actually do the testing. But what happens is we develop a testing exercise and make sure that everything we developed in the prior phases is documented and working, and there's training in place. It could include some type of orientation, and make sure that the results of your testing effort are documented, and of course update the plan with anything you've learned from your testing and exercises. And here's our foundation again, where the BCP should focus on people, the process, and of course the technology. And one thing I wanted to mention, and it will come up again in the next couple slides, but with testing, one thing I like to do from an internal controls perspective is look at including testing and validation as part of a self-assessment of your internal controls. If you're looking at your controls maybe on a quarterly basis, take a look at a business continuity plan and even some basic tests like making sure key processes have them, and then it's an awareness. Some people include business continuity and risk management as part of their entity level controls, and that's important to make sure everything is updated. All right, we're going to try another polling question. And the polling question is, what are the reasons for not automating a financial operations process? And the answers are there are too many solutions, difficult to determine where to start, we don't have the budget, and the last choice is our manual processes are working just fine.
So Chris, we're back on track. Sorry about that minor hiccup. But
that's okay.
Everyone's taking the polls right now. We're at 61%. We'll just give them a couple more seconds and I'll share the results with you all.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I think we're good. We'll share the results.
Okay.
Okay, so 11% chose there are too many solutions, 32% difficult to determine where to start, 36% we don't have the budget, and 21% our manual processes are working just fine.
Okay, looks like the answers were pretty much split across all four choices of answers. So the dilemma is there are too many solutions, and where do you start? And how do you break down what's the most important to you? And of course, a lot of solution providers like Topolti like to get a good understanding of where the pain points are within your company. And of course, looking at the ROI is another key point in helping to make your decision. All right, we started talking about how to build business continuity into your processes. And you know, again, the key point, and we talked about communication, is not to do things in a vacuum. And it's a commitment, and it's making sure that your management team knows what the total effort is to maintain and develop an effective BCP. Now, anyone can use a template for, you know, a BCP, but the point is to develop a good one and make sure it's effective and make sure it's updated. And make sure that your efforts include specific business processes, and determine the impact of an extended loss, and make sure that the plan is easy to develop, maintain, and of course test, and look at including business continuity into ongoing business planning, system development, and processes to make sure that the plan is viable over time. And here's my point about making sure that you take a look at testing the plan as part of your internal controls program. All right, so how can we build continuous continuity into our companies? And I have actually 3 examples for you. And the first one is automating the accounts payable process. If you remember the mini case study I told you about, where I knew a client that was going in the office to get invoices and pay them, and and I hope in some cases issuing payments electronically and not manually, but putting the process at risk, putting suppliers in a situation where they're not getting paid, certainly impacting the timeliness of the financial close. And what we look at is making sure when we're automating the AP process that we're considering the impact not only on the buyer on the AP side, but also on the supplier side. And looking at combining all these processes we're talking about is really setting the stage for true process automation. We consider things like e-accounting and, of course, e-invoicing and e-procurement. And the little chart in the middle of this diagram is the accounts payable process. As you know, the whole process, certainly with accounts payable, can be very daunting. But think about if you started automating at least one of these processes, it would go a long way and not only improving controls, but building in continuity into your process. Here I'm going to mention the types of AP automation. And one of the polling questions was, well, there's a lot of solutions. But if we just look at accounts payable, what is happening here is, yes, we do have a lot of solutions, but they all fit together. And they have an outcome of improved cost, controls, compliance, and, of course, continuity. Supplier portals is one, e-procurement, e-invoicing, PO to invoice conversion, document management, invoice scan and data capture, automated matching, automated workflow approvals, e-payment, system access verification tools, and we'll talk about that in our third example, and of course, accounts payable self-audit tools. Now, one that's certainly a very popular solution now is AI, and that is really getting into e-invoicing and processing the invoice almost directly to your ERP. So the result of these automation solutions is looking at improved AP cost controls and continuity for an ongoing process. We have another polling question coming up. And the question is, why should the AP process be automated? The selections are to avoid duplicate payments, to improve cost compliance and controls, to reduce risk, or all of the above.
Okay, everyone's answering feverishly. We appreciate that. Just a couple more seconds. Thanks, everyone. Okay, the results are in. 3% to avoid duplicate payments, 0 for both to improve cost compliance and controls and to reduce risk, 97% all of the above.
Very good. We have a group of winners. Kind of a loaded question based on everything we talked about, just to see who was paying attention. So thank you very, very much for providing those answers. And yes, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why AP should be automated. But if we look at, certainly reducing risk, improving cost controls, compliance, and avoiding duplicate payments. Now, again, there's no answer for how do you avoid a duplicate payment, but you're going to prevent some of those from occurring. Okay, our second example is automating the financial close. And I'm amazed when I talk to finance organizations how manual the closing process is, particularly when we get into the consolidation and the analysis and reporting. And if you think about it, one of the reasons we talk about accounts payable automation is we want to make sure things are right and number A, or the first component of this process. And if we have proper transactions and ensure that those are accumulated and reconciled in a timely manner, we can have a good subledger close. The second component is the corporate close and consolidation. And many companies are utilizing ERP functionality to do this. Some have third-party tools that are being used to help the close and automate reconciliations. Sometimes a workflow is built into these solutions. And we all want to get to that final mile as quickly and accurately as possible, and that's really the analysis and reporting phase. And before we move on to the next slide, we can actually look at close and consolidation as one component for A and B, and then the final mile is the analysis and reporting phase. And there's the continuity box. Okay, example 3. And this one is certainly a very interesting one, and it's becoming very popular, and that's automating internal controls. So we talked about automating the AP process. We talked about automating the financial close. But how do you know things are working and all your business continuity efforts are working, you're mitigating risk? And it's very difficult to do when many companies still have manual spreadsheets. And there are automation opportunities out there. Some are associated with your ERP. Some are associated with third parties. And it's taking the internal controls ownership and putting it with the business process owners, and of course having a internal controls team or another team in the controllers organization having oversight for the results of internal controls. So where do we look at automating? And there are 4 components. One is looking at user access controls and how to monitor those controls and remediate in a timely manner. And when I talk to clients about where their biggest pain points are in the area of internal controls, they always tell me it's system access. They're worried about individuals being able to do too much in a transaction mode. As an example, there have been some cases where an individual can pay a vendor and also be responsible for setting up that vendor and doing a journal entry to cover their tracks. And you can take a look at what's happening within your ERP by automating this portion of your internal controls program. And the tricky one is business transaction monitoring. And in a lot of automation solutions, we look at the transaction after the fact. Using our Payables example, we might go in and look at payment data to see if a payment has occurred erroneously in areas like duplicate payments, those sorts of things. So business transaction monitoring is more of a detective control. And if we look at the automation user access, that's really preventing a problem from happening. The next one is application and process configuration controls monitoring, and that's making sure that things are working properly with your cloud solutions, with any legacy systems that you have. You want to make sure that configuration was done properly and your system is working as you expected. The last component is controlling your master data, and that includes your supplier master. That includes your employee master, your customer master, and your material master. And in some cases, it's a best practice to put the ownership of those master files in a shared service environment. Everyone except an employee master, because that's always in the hands of accounts payable, or sorry, of HR. So what we want to do is make sure that the master data that's driving all these processes is correct. And there are a lot of standards out there, like coding standards for how we code a customer, how we code a supplier, and we want to make sure that anyone that is brought in to those master files has been screened for compliance. Okay, validating your BCP. All right, we have our last polling question. What processes have you automated? And that includes the financial close, AP, accounts receivable, payroll, or none of the above.
All right, we're just about there, 72%. Thank you all for your speedy answers. Looks like it's another mixed bag, Chris.
Okay, what do we have for answers?
Okay, here we go. So answers: 24% the financial close, 17% AP, 3% AR, 24% payroll, and 31% none of the above.
Okay, yep, pretty much split across. Not a lot of people automate AR, but there are good solutions out there for credit and collection, as well as automated cash application. And, you know, again, we talk about touchless processes as part of a business continuity plan, taking out those manual efforts. And that's becoming the norm, certainly for AP, payroll, and the financial close. So thanks very much for those answers, and we'll move right along into the next bit of content. And again, the most challenging part of a business continuity plan, after you've built it and it's been approved and you think you've got the best plan in the world, the challenges are, how do you test it? And how do you make sure that it's looked at least on a quarterly basis? Doesn't mean you have to go into a great deal of detail, but it's really looking at conducting an exercise, and that's to confirm the accuracy and preparing participants to respond and identify enhancement opportunities. How should the plan be updated and changed? The BCP and supporting provisions are updated and on a defined schedule, and you determine whenever the organization, operations, or environment changes. And just like internal controls or any other overarching corporate process, if there's a business change, we want to make sure that the business continuity plan is updated, and if a new system's been implemented, if a process has changed, if a merger or acquisition has happened, we want to make sure all those things are updated. And the next few are making sure that the participants and the BCP process are knowledgeable of their role and the overall recovery process. And that's the big communication aspect that we talked about earlier, making sure that communication is occurring, certainly when the plan is executed and when you're going through the testing process. Okay, we've got some metrics to consider. How do we measure how effective the business continuity plan is? That would be the percentage of downtime, however you measure that, number of days to recovery, frequency of planned tests performed, service level performance, which would be something to look at with a cloud provider, operational level agreement performance, which is a shared service type of agreement to see how well your shared service organizations are performing, date of last plan update, and you know, again, if these are just sitting on a shared drive somewhere, basically on a virtual shelf, we want to make sure that the dates of the last plan update are fairly current. Cloud computing plans reviewed and obtained, and make sure that your solution providers are adhering to your business continuity plan requirements. So a little bit of coordination is required here, but it's easy to implement these metrics if you're already putting in or capturing cycle time metrics into your business processes. You can see how things have changed and possibly costs going up with some of your key processes. And if you have that type of thought process in your operations, then measuring your business continuity plan is a lot easier. All right, so we're going to have a little panel discussion, and I would like to introduce Jason. Jason is the VP of Revenue Accounting and Finance Automation. So I bet he knows all about some of the automation things we talked about at PubMatic. And prior to working at PubMatic, he had roles at KPMG, AOL, Skype, and Microsoft, and the US and in London. So Jason, welcome, and we're going to get ready to start our panel discussion. Okay, can you talk a little bit about PubMatic and your business?
Sure, thanks Chris, and it's great to be here. It's a pleasure to be on this webcast. So probably a number of you have not actually heard of PubMatic, but you are subject to our services on a daily basis. I'm sure like most of you, you were constantly refreshing websites last night and today, and will continue to do throughout the day to see the results of the US election. In order for these sites to be able to provide that service, they need a revenue stream, which is advertising, and that's what PubMatic provides. In the advertising ecosystem, we are what is considered an SSP. An SSP is a supply-side platform. So what we've created is automation software that connects buyers and sellers of digital advertising. Buyers would be advertisers, agencies, demand-side platforms, and the sellers are publishers of digital content. Think of a buyer like Joe Biden or President Trump who's trying to advertise, while a seller would be like with the websites for the New York Times or CNN, which has space available for advertising. Our mission statement is that we fuel the endless potential of internet content creators. So we care about obviously the large publishers, but also the small publishers. What this really means is that we provide the technology to assist websites in monetizing their advertising at the highest ROI. The advertiser dollars that are generated for these websites are what allows the content to be free or with limited paywalls. For example, when you go onto your favorite website, some of the advertisements will be sold directly by the website owners, which is known as direct sold, but others will be sent to an SSP, such as PubMatic, to monetize. When an ad request, being an impression, comes from a publisher, we perform a real-time auction by sending it out to our customers, our demand-side platforms, to see which one wants to purchase the impression. I'm going to go through an example, but this is what it basically creates. When I go to a website, I get a different ad than when my wife goes to a website. So when we send this out to our customers, they're going to respond with a bid request, effectively saying, I want to purchase that advertising and I'm willing to pay $2 for it, as an example. Other customers that we sent the ad request may also respond and say, I'll pay $2.25, or another customer will respond with a $1.80 bid. We'll take all those bids and we'll pass on the highest bid that we receive back to the publisher. Simultaneously, the publisher may have also sent the same impression to other SSPs, which would be our competitors, who will also respond back with their highest bid. The publisher will then send a winning bid notification to the SSP who won the overall auction. The SSP will then send a winning notification to the customer who won, and the ad will then be rendered on the user device. What's amazing is these multiple auctions that are happening on our side, on our competitor side, on the publisher side, all happen in fractions of seconds and all drive to deliver the highest ROI to the publisher. And at our company, we do this about 130 billion times a day, these auctions. So it's a lot of data there. At the end of each month, we aggregate all the winning bids for the customers and send them an invoice. We then create a statement that details the earnings and fees for each of our publishers, and we make a payment to the publisher. So in effect, we're a bit of a clearinghouse in the middle between the buyers and sellers. So that's a little bit about how PubMatic works. And so thank you all for continuing to refresh your election results and help us achieve our revenue goals at our company.
Thanks for that information. Very interesting. Okay, and next question I have for you, Jason, is what cloud technologies have you employed to reduce data loss in the event of a disaster recovery?
Yes. So fortunately, we've never had to deal with a disaster recovery situation. It's obviously something we never want to deal with. But we use a number of cloud technologies, specifically in our finance organization. So our backbone is our ERP system, which we use NetSuite. About 10 years ago, we transitioned from QuickBooks to NetSuite as we grew. Not 10 years, about 5 years ago. We then have APIs between NetSuite and Adaptive that assists us with forecasting. And then we have NetSuite into Policy to assist with payables. And we also do have some AR automation as well. We have between NetSuite and YayPay to assist with collections of our receivables. The most important thing that we look for in cloud technologies, and I urge you, is that to make sure that it's APIs all the time to avoid uploading and downloading of information, which makes it more seamless for the folks in the finance organization. Further, in our finance organization, as well as everywhere, we use Microsoft OneDrive for saving our files. This is something I've kind of had to really push my team to continue to do. Everyone loves saving stuff on their desktop. It's quicker, but really, it's really important that, everything is saved onto OneDrive. And this has some benefits. It allows us to easily share files throughout the organization, but it also has the benefit of backing up previous versions automatically as changes are made. Now, this is not exactly a 100% disaster recovery, but just recently, I was working on our sales bonus calculation, and I got a pretty panic call from a team member late at night as they were working through the Q3 bonus calculation that we were nearly completed with. And I got that error that says, your Excel file has been corrupted. Do you want to recover as much data as possible? And I'm sure you've gotten that error a few times as you work in Excel. And typically, it's not a problem. You say, yes, I want to recover, and the file seems to work. And this was a really critical file. It calculates all the sales commissions for hundreds of employees, and it took a significant amount of time. When we said, go ahead and recover, the problem was that after the file got recovered, all the pivots, formatting, and some other data in it was not correct. And that's a pretty critical part of the file. Fortunately, as we've been saving the file on OneDrive, we were able to find a version that did not have that issue and restore that version. So instead of having to recreate the file, we found a file in OneDrive that automatically saved it, and we only had to layer in, 10 or 12 changes that happened in the last few hours. And that really shown, was a good reason why it's really important to kind of back up your files and save them in a cloud file that has, automatic version controls. I've also had issues, everyone needs to move to a new computer. But, for us, as all of our applications and files are in the cloud, it's a pretty fairly painless process when you move to a new computer, which is not exactly a disaster recovery, but it's just kind of, it saves a lot of time as you have, more of your applications and files saved onto the cloud.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Okay, in what ways have you used automation to reduce external fraud risk?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would like to think that we could reduce it to 100% through automation. I don't think we'll ever get to that point where it's going to solve all our fraud risk. But there are steps we have taken. I think, as you alluded in the beginning, there is a tremendous amount of phishing schemes to gather information. Unfortunately, one that comes to mind for me was related to payments customers were making to us. So this was a few years ago. I received an email from a customer asking for a W-9, which is a very, very common request. And I passed along our W-9 as requested. Really didn't think anything about it. What I did not realize at the time was that the email address from the customer was slightly different. For example, my email address is jason.wexler@pubmatic.com, but this email was from jason.wexler@pubmaticteam.com. So there wasn't anything misspelled. There wasn't, they weren't trying to, change an I to a 1 or something like that. It was just, added on team to the end. So a few weeks later, I received an email from the actual customer questioning me on why we want our payments to be made to a bank in Hong Kong and shared with me the request. What the fraudster did was take our W-9 and update it slightly and add an appendix with bank information to make it seem genuine. They sent an email that appeared to come from me to the customer. So effectively, they fabricated emails on both sides. Fortunately, we have strong relationships with our customers that they picked up that it's not a genuine request. And we also filed this information with the FBI, but we never heard back from them. But it kind of really put us a catalyst to really think about fraud risk more. And it's something we've always thought about, but pushed us a little bit further. So the highest fraud risk that comes to mind whenever we talk about it is really bank details for our publishers and vendors that we pay. And in our industry, there is significant M&A. And so bank details and name changes are extremely frequent. Some of our vendors also use factoring agencies, where payments are made to a different person than the company name. So when we would receive a bank change, we would spend a considerable amount of time reviewing the details and corroborating that they were correct, either by placing a call to the vendor directly or having the customer success manager confirm with their contacts. About 2 years ago, we moved to Tipalti to process our payments. This assisted us with making our payment run quicker, but also reduced the fraud risk with bank detail changes. For any bank detail changes, we require our publishers, vendors, to log into our password-protected UI, which includes an iframe for Tipalti, where they can update their bank details, as well as see past and future payments. If the bank details change, an automated message is sent to the publisher to let them know of the change. We also lock certain names in the iframe, certain fields. So we would lock company name in the iframe. So it's required that the publisher get in contact with us if their account name on their bank account does not match the company name in their contract. This is advantageous to reduce fraud, since for certain payments, the payment would be rejected if company name on the payment file does not match the bank account name. And so what we do now is any request that we receive over email or through other means, other than through the iframe, we just simply respond with, we require you to update the details in our UI. This has one also just tremendous benefit is back to what I was saying, our team was spending lots of time. So it's a time saving for our team to get them back to value add processes rather than just updating bank detail changes. So I highly suggest you use a tool to automate as much on the payable side to reduce fraud risk.
Okay, thanks. And I think you alluded to this one a little bit, but could you get into a little bit more detail on what internal controls are part of your payables process?
Yes, yep, exactly. So the highest controls that we have around payables are with segregation and responsibilities that you alluded to earlier. So what we have created is defined roles for certain employees. So some of our employees are only permitted to set up vendors. That's all they can do is set up vendors. We then have some roles that are permitted to make payments. And then we have other roles that have access to approved payments. Now we are a small organization, so some you wouldn't be able to have all these different controls in place. But we have one further, overarching control at the end is that, all of our payments before going out require 2 approvals. And these segregation of responsibilities have helped us ensure that we have a clean payables process.
Okay, great. Yeah, and that's important because segregation of responsibilities or duties is one of the most common causes of a fraud. So it's great that you have that built in. All right, I'm gonna turn it over. Thank you very much, Jason. And I'm going to turn it over to Derek. And we're going to talk about future-proofing financial operations.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Jason. I'm really grateful for all of you attending today as well. It's always the same story when it comes to software. There's a manual process that needs solving for the business needs to jump ahead to the next level. And for marketing departments, sales teams, IT support, you name it, everyone in the organization, this has always been true. But what's unique about our era is that the finance organization is finally starting to get some of that technology love, especially today when we're all in this Black Swan event working from home. The paperless back office is no longer a wish, it's really a necessity. And that requires technology that can modernize finance operations and remove all those gaps. It requires software that goes beyond solving 1 or 2 pain points and instead can address the entire holistic payables process. And that's what strategic, high velocity finance teams really need right now. We work with at Tipalti over 1,000 companies. Many are likely brands you recognize, and proudly, these customers stick with us at a very high retention rate. Fewer than 1% of our customers ever stop using us. And last month, actually, we closed a $150 million round of funding, leading to a $2 billion valuation. So what the industry and our customers recognize is how vital Tipalti is to keeping the business running. like an ERP or a spreadsheet. Payables automation has become essential at the infrastructure level. And CFOs, controllers, they've exchanged their bank fobs for us to pay thousands of suppliers worldwide in a matter of clicks, and to do so kind of securely, accurately, and in a very auditable way. Fun fact, as Chris was mentioning about paper transactions, for our customers, under 5% of our transactions are through paper check. So the rest of it is all electronic, which is pandemic proof, it's accurate, and it's auditable. The other thing about Tipalti customers is they bring us in when there's an immediate need to address their future, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years into the future. Even in a pandemic, businesses have to keep looking forward, and they might be expanding internationally. They might be acquiring businesses, increasing the pace of their operations, or they just simply want better financial controls to protect against risk. They see payables as mission critical to keeping their business running as well as thriving. Next slide, please, Chris.
Okay.
Thank you. This is the CFO LC. What we know about you is you are obviously the more senior finance audience. With that, you lean towards more big picture thinking. So I'm going to ask you to do that with payables for a moment. Most people think of invoices when they think of payables. And agreed, it's the most painful process involved. You've got manual data entry, you're hunting down approvals, and that's why when people hear the term AP automation, they're thinking OCR. But even that is just a small percentage of the payables flow. Tipalti provides one holistic system that institutionalizes best practices around financial controls at the most critical points in payables. When invoices are being approved, as an example, and when money leaves your company. Ours is a scalable system that removes all those operational gaps and enables payables to quickly respond to change. We consistently remove 80% of that workload, and that includes reinforcing the processes with best practices around tax, regulatory, fraud detection. One other benefit to a holistic system like Tipalti is that it uniquely ties invoices and payments transactions together and offers a more faster, more accurate financial close, and that gets directly imported into your ERP. Tipalti solves today's payables challenges today, and then it readies you for tomorrow. So with that, I'll hand it back to Chris. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thanks, Derek. All right, we're going to open it up for your questions, and feel free to jump in with hopefully some thought-provoking questions that will get us going here as we close out the presentation. And again, I'd like to thank everyone for attending and participating, and we'll just open up for questions right now.
That is fabulous. Thank you, Chris. And I'm so glad we have time because there are a couple questions I'd love to get answered. So the first one actually goes to Jason. Can you talk about your invoice processing flow? Does Tipalti help you process invoices more quickly? If yes, do you have any info on how much time, money was saved when switching to invoice processing through Tipalti? And thank you.
Great question. Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. So when we originally onboarded Tipalti, we did it just for our publishers, which is considered mass pay. For our publishers, we actually self-invoice them. So that really helped us pay, thousands of payments very quickly. About maybe a little bit less than a year ago, we then also onboarded for the rest of our operating expenses, things like, rent, facilities, and those items, utilities. And marketing events. And through them, what we do now, instead of when we get an invoice, instead of having to code it into NetSuite, our GL team sends it to a dedicated email alias, which then does some optical scanning and puts that into the system and then routes it for the approvals that are needed before payment. So what I don't know exactly on, cost savings and time savings and things of that nature. But what I can say is what it has really allowed us to do is to continue to grow and scale. We're growing quite rapidly without adding incremental headcount in the finance organization, which is always somewhat of a benefit, because really where you want to add your headcount is kind of sales, marketing, engineering in that area. So we've been able to go from, hundreds of payments to thousands of payments without adding additional resources. So that's really the benefit that we've seen, and bringing people doing more value add activities rather than just processing payments.
Thank you so much, Jason. That was a fabulous explanation. The next one actually comes from Chris. Since this is about business continuity, what do you suggest that your customers put in place in case you are down for a month or so?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. Yeah, and I guess when you're down for a month or so, you'd have to kind of look at prioritizing where the biggest risk is, what's not happening. And, as using our payables example, are you not paying suppliers? And are you at risk as maybe severing those relationships with suppliers? The other kind of key priority, and I've spent a lot of time in accounts payable as well as in payroll. And one of the things we always talked about when I was director of payroll for Compaq Computer before the merger with HP, there's no pain like payroll pain. And I think one of the biggest areas to focus with being down for a while is, are your employees being paid? Because if there's a situation like we're in now, and your employees are not getting their paychecks or their deposits or direct deposits, they're in trouble because they can't function. So I think if you're down for a month or so, I think going back to your plan and your priorities, and really focusing on what needs to happen, and of course looking at the impact on cash and cash flow, and just prioritizing, because one thing that's daunting, as we know, that you can't do everything at once. So you do have to prioritize. And again, having your BCP in place. And I really think, and we didn't talk about it a lot, but a good BCP goes hand in hand with your risk management process as well.
Okay, thank you so much. And I got to say, I love that quote. There's no pain like payroll pain. I think I just audience nodding. All right, so I actually have two. I think they go hand in hand, but I'm going to ask them together and you can break them up. I know we're approaching the top of the hour. So I will say to the audience, and not to put the speakers on the spot, but if we don't get to some questions, there is a follow-up email that goes out tomorrow. So we'll get those answered then as well. We can include those answers. So last two questions, actually. What are some of the ways that AP automation prevents fraud? And also, does the Tipalti integrate with ERPs?
I'll answer that. Preventing fraud. Basically, if you're automating invoices, you don't have people kind of changing around the invoice. Again, less hands on keyboards, less manual paper. And that means that you're going to have a valid invoice, of course, tied back to a valid supplier. The last part, of course, automation that we talk about is the payment process. And check fraud, according to the AFP, Association of Finance Professionals, is still on the rise. I think it was like 74%, as reported by the respondents in their last survey. So get rid of those checks, and you can alleviate check fraud. And automating AP from start to finish is going to get you a lot closer.
Yeah, and just to dovetail to what Chris was saying, at Tipalti, we think of fraud not just as fraud, but also just human error. There's issues with duplicate payments. There's issues with, in case of maybe someone trying to embed their payment details into a different account. So being able to know when that happens, heuristically scanning for that stuff. There's a lot of AI involved in that. So AP automation is there to act as the gatekeeper in a lot of ways, and ensuring that the right invoices are approved by the right people and the right payments are approved by the right people. And that's even before going out and setting up a wire transfer. In a pandemic, it's much more complex to do if you've got a large finance team that's responsible for making payments. So as far as the question, does Tipalti integrate with ERPs? We certainly do. As Jason mentioned, they're using NetSuite, and we have a very deep integration with NetSuite, including with NetSuite OneWorld. We also integrate directly with Intact and QuickBooks, but QuickBooks Online, I should specify. And then we have a facility for transferring payables information to any ERP, and our reps can help you kind of decipher what that means. Yeah, the goal is obviously so that you can reconcile quicker, and because we have the payment details in terms of transactions, we know specifically, very accurately, what that data should look like, and it's a really unique set of data that you can get into your ERP.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. We are at the top of the hour. So again, I just wanted to thank Chris for your time today, and Derek and Jason for your great input here, and especially to Tipalti for sponsorship. I do hope you all receive some valuable and practicable info during the session today. The recordings are available again to our members in the resource library, so I hope that you access if you need a refresh. This concludes today's program. Stay well and stay connected.